What happens when a high-profile guest completely loses control during a live television interview, forcing the host to make a shocking, unprecedented decision that leaves millions speechless? You're about to witness one of the most jaw-dropping moments in morning television history. Michael Strahan had hosted Good Morning America for years. He'd seen it all. Difficult guests, awkward silences, technical meltdowns. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold that morning. Producers were ecstatic. Meghan Markle had agreed to an exclusive sit-down. It was supposed to be a standard promotional segment, the kind that filled airtime and generated a predictable burst of online chatter. As Michael reviewed his notes in the makeup chair, everything seemed routine. The studio buzzed with familiar pre-show energy, lights being adjusted, microphones tested, cameras aligned. Meghan had arrived on time, glided through hair and makeup, and exchanged polite smiles with the crew. Her publicist had even approved a list of talking points. Nothing controversial. Nothing off limits. 5 minutes to air, called the floor director. Michael took his seat on set. A pair of armchairs angled perfectly for conversation. Soft morning light filtering through the windows. Fresh flowers on the side table. It was picture-perfect television. Meghan adjusted her outfit, checked her reflection on the monitor, and smiled as the sound technician clipped on her mic. Everything looked flawless. The countdown began. Michael slipped into his professional rhythm. The calm, confident ease that made him one of TV's most trusted faces. "Good morning, everyone," he began, flashing his signature grin. "I'm Michael Strahan, and today we're joined by a very special guest, Meghan Markle. We're thrilled to have her here to talk about her latest projects and initiatives. Meghan, thank you so much for joining us." "Thank you for having me, Michael," she replied smoothly, her tone polished and familiar. "I'm delighted to be here." The first few minutes went off without a hitch. Michael asked about her charitable work, her upcoming projects, and her thoughts on social advocacy. Meghan's answers were articulate and measured, hitting every talking point. The atmosphere was relaxed. The producers nodded approvingly behind the cameras. Then, without warning, something shifted. Michael, following his notes, asked a seemingly harmless question about how she approaches interviews with different media outlets. "Well, Michael," Meghan began, her tone suddenly sharper. "Not all interviews are created equal, and frankly, not all interviewers are capable of handling certain conversations with the nuance they require." Michael's eyebrows lifted slightly, though he kept his composure. Guests occasionally took digs at the media. It wasn't unusual. He smiled lightly and followed up. "That's an interesting perspective. Could you elaborate on what makes for a more effective interview dynamic in your experience?" But Meghan's expression hardened. She leaned forward, her voice lower now, carrying a weight that instantly changed the air in the room. "What I mean, Michael," she said, "is that there are interviewers who understand complex issues, and others who are better suited for lighter topics. Sports commentary, for instance, demands a very different skill set than conversations about social or cultural importance." The room went still. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged uneasy glances. This was not in the script. Michael's years of live experience kicked in. Calmly he replied, "I understand your point, Meghan. Though I think most of us in broadcasting value the chance to explore a wide range of subjects. That's part of what makes this job so rewarding." Instead of softening, Meghan doubled down. Her tone grew sharper, her words cutting with precision. "That's exactly the problem, Michael. This tendency to flatten complex issues, to treat them all as if they carry the same weight. When someone like me comes here to discuss real issues, meaningful ones that affect people's lives." "People's lives?" Meghan continued, her tone sharpening. "I expect to speak with someone who understands the gravity of these topics, not someone whose primary experience involves batting averages and touchdown passes." Michael's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Years of media training urged him to keep calm, but inside, he could feel the first flicker of disbelief. He had endured difficult interviews before, but never one where a guest had so openly insulted him. Live on air. Camera operators hesitated, glancing toward the control booth. Should they cut? Keep rolling? The studio fell silent, save for the low hum of equipment and the sharp edge in Meghan's voice. Meghan, Michael began evenly, keeping his tone measured. I think there's been some misunderstanding. We invited you here for a respectful conversation about your work and the initiatives you care about. I'm not sure where this hostility is coming from, but maybe we can refocus on the topics you'd like to discuss. Instead of diffusing the tension, his professionalism seemed to embolden her. Meghan leaned back in her chair, shaking her head with visible disappointment. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Michael, she said coldly. The inability to engage with difficult ideas. The instant retreat to safe surface-level conversation the moment things get uncomfortable. It's this kind of intellectual timidity that makes certain media personalities unfit for serious discourse. The insult hung in the air, unmistakable. From the main desk, Michael's co-hosts watched in stunned silence. The floor director frantically gestured toward the control room, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the scene play out. Michael inhaled slowly, feeling the war between instinct and restraint. He'd built his career on grace and composure, finding humanity even in awkward moments. But this was different. Continuing to stay calm only seemed to invite more contempt. Meghan, he said finally, his tone firm but still controlled. I'm going to stop you right there. I've been nothing but respectful since you walked into this studio. You were invited here to share your message with our viewers. What you're doing now isn't just unprofessional. It's disrespectful to everyone who works on this show and to the people watching at home. For a moment it seemed his words might reset the tone, but Meghan's eyes flashed. She sat forward, voice rising. Disrespectful? She repeated. What's disrespectful, Michael, is pretending all opinions, all expertise, are equally valid. What's disrespectful is forcing someone like me, who has lived through actual experiences, to pretend that shallow, surface-level questions qualify as meaningful journalism. Michael's patience was wearing dangerously thin, but he made one last attempt to steer the interview back on track. Meghan, he said, carefully measured, if there are specific topics you want to explore, or questions you think would be more valuable, I'm happy to pivot in that direction. But what I won't do is sit here while you insult me, my background, or the work this team does every day. The offer, meant as an olive branch, only seemed to fuel her. Meghan leaned in, eyes narrowing, her tone now cold and precise. You see, that's exactly the problem with people in your position, Michael, she said. You think changing the subject solves the issue? But it doesn't. This isn't about topics. It's about competence. You can't pivot your way out of being out of your depth. This isn't a matter of conversation style. It's a matter of intellectual capacity. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Even the background hum of the set equipment felt muted. Every person in the studio, camera crew, producers, co-hosts, froze, processing what had just been said on live television. Michael's expression shifted. The warmth was gone. His voice, when he spoke, was low and precise, each word edged with restrained anger. Are you seriously questioning my intellectual capacity on live television? He asked. You're sitting here, as a guest on my show, suggesting that I'm somehow beneath you. Rather than realizing how far she'd gone, Meghan seemed almost energized by his reaction. Meghan leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting into something that could only be described as smug satisfaction. She looked utterly convinced she had won the exchange. "I'm not suggesting anything, Michael," she said smoothly. "I'm stating that some people are equipped to handle complex, nuanced discussions about serious issues, and some are better suited to lighter fare. There's nothing wrong with knowing your limitations. What's wrong is pretending they don't exist." Michael stared at her for a long moment. His jaw was tight, hands gripping the arms of his chair. The cameras caught the subtle change in his expression. The moment he decided he was done being polite, when he finally spoke, his voice carried the calm, deliberate authority of a man who had spent decades commanding live television. "Let me tell you something, Meghan," he said evenly, "and I want you to listen carefully, because this is important." The studio went silent. "I've been in broadcasting for over 2 decades. I've covered natural disasters, political elections, human tragedies, moments that changed the world. I've interviewed presidents, Nobel Prize winners, activists, artists, and yes, athletes too, because they're human beings with stories worth telling." Meghan opened her mouth to interrupt her, but Michael raised a hand and continued, his tone growing stronger. "You came here as my guest. I welcomed you with respect and professionalism. I prepared thoughtful questions. I gave you a platform to share your message. And for the past several minutes, you've insulted not just me, but every person who works behind the scenes to make this show what it is. And now you've questioned my intelligence." In the control room, producers were arguing, half insisting they cut to commercial, half whispering that they couldn't look away. They were witnessing television history, and nobody dared to break the moment. Michael rose slowly from his chair, his full height casting a quiet authority over the set. Meghan suddenly looked smaller, her composure slipping. His movements were steady, deliberate, not explosive but final. "I've had enough," he said, voice low but resonant. "This interview is over. Not because I can't handle difficult conversations or challenging topics, but because I refuse to give a platform to someone who mistakes disrespect and arrogance for intelligent discourse. You're done here." For the first time, Meghan's confidence faltered. She looked around the studio, scanning the faces of the crew for some sign of support, but all she saw were wide eyes and stunned expressions. The silence was suffocating. "You can't just end an interview because you don't like what I'm saying," she said finally, her tone brittle, stripped of its earlier assurance. "This is supposed to be a professional conversation." Michael's response was immediate, his voice clear and unshakable. "You're absolutely right, Meghan. It was supposed to be professional, but you decided to make it personal. You turned a conversation into an attack. You insulted my intelligence, my background, and the integrity of this team. That's not journalism. That's cruelty, dressed up as intellect." The air in the studio crackled with tension. Crew members stood frozen. Co-hosts whispered nervously off camera. Everyone knew they were watching something unprecedented unfold, in real time. Meghan's expression finally began to crumble. The confidence that had defined her throughout the segment was evaporating, replaced by a thin edge of panic. She looked from Michael to the cameras, realizing too late how far she'd gone. "Michael, I think you're overreacting," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "We're having a spirited discussion. Isn't that what good television is supposed to be? Honest, challenging conversations that push boundaries." Michael shook his head slowly. His tone was calm again, but there was no trace of warmth left. "No, Meghan, that's not what this was. A spirited discussion means mutual respect. It means engaging in good faith. What you did was something else entirely. Personal attacks disguised as intellectual superiority. You didn't challenge my questions. You attacked my character and my competence. And there's a world of difference between those two things." Meghan tried one last time to reclaim the moment, her voice tightening with desperation. "I was simply trying to elevate the conversation beyond superficial pleasantries," she insisted. But even as she spoke, Meghan seemed to realize how hollow her justification sounded. Sometimes real progress requires uncomfortable honesty about the limitations we all face in different areas, she said, her tone faltering slightly as the words left her mouth. Michael's response was immediate, measured, sharp, and devastating in its clarity. He had found his footing again, and when he spoke it was with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he stood. Uncomfortable honesty, he repeated, his tone cutting through the silence. Is that what you call it when you suggest that my background in sports makes me unqualified to speak with you? When you imply that I lack the intellect for meaningful journalism? Because from where I'm standing, that doesn't sound like honesty. It sounds like arrogance and disrespect. The studio fell utterly silent, the tension thick enough to feel. Camera operators stayed locked on the scene, aware they were capturing a moment that would be replayed for years to come. Behind the glass, producers whispered urgently, torn between cutting to commercial or letting the moment unfold. Meghan, visibly rattled, tried to regain control. Her voice, which had earlier carried confidence and superiority, now trembled with forced calm. Michael, please, she began. I think we're both getting a bit heated. Maybe we should take a step back, find some common ground. I didn't mean to offend you personally. Perhaps I could have phrased things more diplomatically. But Michael's expression made it clear that diplomacy had come and gone. When he spoke, every word was steady and deliberate, carrying the full weight of his decision. Meghan, the time for diplomacy was when you first sat in that chair. The time for common ground was when I welcomed you onto this show and gave you the space to share your message respectfully. You chose a different path. You chose to make it personal. You chose to insult me. And you chose to treat this platform, and everyone who works on it, with contempt. He paused, turning briefly to the camera before fixing his gaze on her again. I've been doing this job long enough to know the difference between a difficult conversation and a personal attack. I've interviewed people I disagreed with, people who challenged me, pushed back, and held strong opinions, and I respected every one of them, because those conversations were built on mutual respect. What happened here today was not that. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but Michael continued, his tone now firm and commanding. You questioned my intellect. You dismissed my professional experience. You called into doubt my fitness to do this job, all while sitting as a guest on my show, speaking to my audience. That's not discourse. That's disrespect, and I won't tolerate it. The finality in his tone left no room for argument, but Meghan still hesitated, glancing around the studio for help that wasn't coming. So, what happens now? She asked quietly. You're just going to end this because you didn't like my tone. Michael didn't hesitate. What happens now? He said. Is that you leave. This interview is over. This segment is done. I've given you every opportunity to conduct yourself professionally, and you refused. I'm not giving you another chance to insult me, or anyone else here. For a long moment, Meghan sat frozen, stunned. When she finally rose, her movements were awkward, stripped of the confidence she had worn so easily at the start. This is unprecedented, she muttered half to herself. I've never been treated like this in an interview before. Michael's reply was calm, almost quiet but resolute. Maybe that's because you've never behaved like this in an interview before, he said evenly. Or maybe other hosts were willing to tolerate behavior that I won't. Either way, this conversation is finished. As Meghan gathered her things and walked toward the exit, escorted discreetly by a member of the security staff, Michael turned back to the camera. His face had softened slightly, but his voice remained steady. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll continue with the rest of today's program. Sometimes in live television things don't go according to plan, but we will always do our best to maintain the standards of respect and professionalism that you, our viewers, deserve. The camera lingered on him for a few seconds longer, his composure firm, but the disappointment unmistakable. Before the feed finally cut to commercial, the studio remained silent. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. What did you think of Michael Strahan's decision to end the interview? Was he right to draw the line? Or should he have handled it differently? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.